Let's talk Java and the layout of the course. So each week I'll do a recording of making sure you understand some of the content. But please, 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 it's really important that you still read the online book. Of course, you can always get a copy of that book in print for $7.99 at cengage.com. But let's start here. What are the 50 best jobs in America? And here's the reason I'm showing that to you. This is the Glassdoor website. And notice number 1, number 2, number 3, number 5, number 7, and a lot of other ones that are on this list state that IT is the way to go. In fact, if you looked at all the software developer, systems engineer, if you really UX designer, which is like the design of the layout, if you look at all of these out of the top 50, over half of them are IT. And look directly at number 2, Java developer. Front-end engineer is really close. It's the person who would, example, design how the flow of a site like Airbnb would go. What are people searching for? How do they find it? How do we get them to come back? How do we connect with them? So that would be that. So Java developer, great pay, tons of job openings. So this is where to go. So this is why we're teaching Java at CVCC. So now that you're into MindTap, let's talk about what a Java program is and lecture a little bit on what you should know. First of all, what is a computer program? Well, it's just a set of instructions, and that could be an app on a phone. It could be a website that does something, a process like banking. Almost everything is a computer program anymore, and Java is the most used language in the world. So Java opens the door to these computer programs. Now, Java is not written in machine language. Instead, machine language is Java is compiled into the machine language as a low-level language that tells the computer what to do. So Java is a high-level programming languages. It has this syntax or vocabulary of the terms that allow you to do code. So let me open JGrasp here. And this is what a computer program would look like. It is a tradition that every Java or any programming languages, we always write a hello world program first that simply says hello world. That, by the way, started in the 70s with C programming and Dennis Ritchie. So here's what code and syntax. Look at these purple words are reserved words that only used for coding. Text is in green inside of our syntax. So they're kind of these program statements that you see are similar to English. These commands carry out tasks. So let me show you. This is code. This would be a class. Notice the class begins with an opening brace and closes with a closing brace. If you have one, you must have the other. This class is the area that is holding this piece of code to print out hello world. And this is the command that prints out hello world right here. It says go out to your system of your computer, print it out, print a line, and the line that we want it to print out is just simply hello world. When we print something else, we put it in quotation marks, and a typical command line, not the class or what we call the main, has a semicolon at the end. So if I were to run this, run is a term that simply means make the program go. I can do this by clicking on build and picking run or Control R. And when I run this, down here is where it's showing the output or what we call a print line. So down here, I know it's not too exciting yet, but we print hello world, exclamation point. So let me show you now how I made this program. So we're going to be using a compiler or an interpreter in this class. And if you watched the earlier video, we downloaded JGrasp. and watch that earlier video to do that. So I'm clicking and opening JGrasp. It usually opens up to whatever program you had last open. So instead, I'm going to go to File, and I am going to go to Close All to make sure everything is closed here, all my windows. And I'm going to create a new program. I'm going to go to File and New and Java. That's the code language that we're choosing to pick. And the top of this screen is the code window that allows you to type in some code here. So one of the first pieces of code we're going to type in is a comment. So, and then in this comment, we've got to make sure we don't have any syntax errors. That means a misuse of some kind of language rule. It's just like me making a grammar mistake or a spelling mistake. We want to make sure there's no errors. We call that debugging the program. And we want to make sure there's not a logic error. Logic error is when, for example, you do the math wrong and come up with the wrong conclusion. If I were trying to double the number 7 and I didn't come up with the number 14, I've made a logic error somewhere. The program runs, but it doesn't work correctly. It doesn't do math or something that it's going to do. We can have procedural programming. This is the use of variables. We're going to be doing that next week. And everything in Java is considered object-oriented programming. What we mean by that is we create a class as a container, and it's the blueprint for laying out all the objects in my program. And we're going to be using, it's also called OOP, object-oriented programming. So we can make computer simulations. We can use a graphical user interface. And some of the words you're going to hear over the next few weeks are polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation. But let's start to build our first little comment. Now, I recommend while you're watching this video, open JGrasp, hit File, New, and Java, and do the steps that I do to make sure yours is working on your side. So the first thing that we want to do is come up with something called a comment. A comment in code is just for the person who's looking at the code. It does nothing as far as running the code. So one of my first comments I'm going to put on this first line, and I'm going to put 2 forward slashes. And if you're looking at your keyboard, it's the one that shares the question mark. If they don't turn red, something went wrong. Red means comments. So I'm going to, doesn't matter with spacing really, I'm just going to say my first program. For some of you that's true, for a lot of you it might not be, sorry. So my first program, it doesn't matter uppercase, lowercase, this is not going to be executed except a lot of times you use comments to say whose program is this. And in addition to that, things such as making sure you comment the sections in code. So what I'd like you to do in anything that you turn in out for a Scratch program, always put your first and last name. You don't need my first program. So this is, I'm going to put author here of the code. So if you would put this, you have an assignment called Program from Scratch this week. So make sure you have your author, the date that you're turning it in. And I think our first due date is next Wednesday. So let's check that date, September 2nd. So put the due date in. And what it is. So in this case, we're going to put the project that we're writing or the app. This one's just going to call Hello World. But if you're writing something else, put that there. I usually skip an extra line after I do this. Again, if I were to run right now, and let me go ahead and do that so you can see, if I go to build and run and save it right now, I'll hit save. Let's put the file name of Hello World down here. I'm going to have to probably put Hello World again because I've certainly done this before in a class. And it's saying, you know, there's no methods, there's no applications. These are just comments. So there's nothing to execute just yet. So we're good to go. Now let's kind of learn what we're going to do next. Next, I want to set up a class. Every Java program needs a class. And to understand class, I want you to imagine if we called all animals in the world that are dogs the dog class. So our definition would be any dog in the planet, and it would include things like what is that dog's name, what is their age, what is their breed, what is their shot status. So we would have something called a dog class, and each one of these individual dogs would be an instant or an object of the dog class. So we've got this first dog here. This is Ginger. She's 6. She's an Akita. Her shots are up to date. So she would be from the dog class, but she's a particular instance of that, or what we call an object. Hey, we have our next dog. This is Bowser. He is 2. He's a retriever, and his shots are up to date. So now we have a second instance of the dog class, or a second object. And then we have Roxy. He's 1 or she's 1. Hard to tell. Beagle and up to date. So we have this class that we're always going to create with definitions in it. So just like the dog class, I'm going to call my class, and here's how we code it. We are in our project, and I'm typing in CLASS. Every project has to have this class. And I'm going to call our class Hello World. And here's how we typically do it. We call this camel case. It is going to have like a capital letter at the beginning of each word. So H and W are capitalized. It's kind of like at a camel. Every time we get to the first letter of a word, we uppercase it. And a class always has this structure. We put a curly brace there, not the square brace. Hit enter a few times, and a closing brace, also curly brace. And now we have this class or this container to put all of our code inside. So far, so good. So let's come back to our slides. And next. So what goes inside of our class or our outside container? Well, inside of a class, you can put 1 or more methods. So what's a method? It's a self-contained little block of code that does something, carries out some kind of action. Some people call it a procedure. And inside this little block of code called a method, we want to make sure that no other side code can get in there and look at what are the values in here. We want to make sure any of these little values inside or variables or any processes that nobody else can see. So we call that encapsulation. It conceals the internal values and keeps everything secure. For example, we're not allowed to, hack into the IRS and find out how much everyone makes, right? So that data must be inside of a method and encapsulated so no one can get a hold of that information. So let's go back and now do that. So I've gone back to JGrasp and I've clicked right below the line that started our class Hello World, and we have our beginning and closing brace. Inside the class, not outside the class, we're going to put in our method. And what the method looks like is we're going to type public, put a space, static, put a space, void, put a space, type in the word main, lowercase by the way, left parenthesis, and this is case sensitive. So put the word string square braces, put a space, and ARGS, end of right parentheses. So what is all that? That is considered a method that is inside every class. This is our first method, in this case, our only one. Now that we've typed in the code that designates a method, and if you're curious what all these things mean, public just means other methods can see this one. Static and void. For now, let's just leave some of the code there. I'll get deeper on another day. And then put a beginning brace, hit enter a couple times, and a closing brace. Oh, curly brace, sorry. So now that we have this beginning ending, and you say, well, should there be a space between these two lines? It doesn't matter. If you have an extra blank line thrown in, don't be that concerned. So let me go over again. We have a class, that's our outside container. Inside of it, now we have one little method. Now the method's not doing anything inside of it, but once we do put something in here, it'll be encapsulated from any other piece of code and app anywhere on the planet, and they won't be able to get in here. It's now kind of locked up, if you would. Now, two big other terms in chapter 1, and we're going to hear this every chapter, is inheritance and polymorphism. You're like, what? Well, inheritance simply means that we want to be able to reuse code without writing fresh code for every project. Remember I gave you that example of adding two numbers together, like 7 plus 7? Well, maybe we make a class that is always going to add numbers together, whatever the project is. It could be a banking project one week, but next week it could be that we are adding the length of the sidewalk to expand the cities of Lynchburg. So that's called inheritance, when I can reuse that code. And polymorphism just means many forms. It allows the same code to be used in different situations based on context. Just like we were talking about that adding class could be used over and over again based on whatever program needs to add that week. But think of it bigger. It could be finding interest in a banking situation or something along those lines. So let me tell you a little background of Java, and then we'll finish up this program. It was developed by Sun Microsystems. It's an object-oriented language, and it can be run on all types of computers. So you can run PC, Mac, well, Chromebook, no, just because it's not really a computer, it's just a browser. But even smartphones like Androids run Java code. So this source code we're going to be writing has programming statements written in high-level programming languages. So we're using our JGrasp as our interpreter or our product. And what it's going to allow us to do is type in Java source code. It's going to compile the code for us, tell if there's any errors or anything like that. It's going to convert it to Java virtual machine. And then finally, so that our computer operating system can understand what it's supposed to be doing. So if you're curious what that looks like. Some other common terms in this chapter: WARA, write once, run anywhere. So if we write this code that does XYZ, it should also work on our mobile device or inside of an Android car or a smartwatch. So we're going to see a lot of that. So even the simplest Java application has a fair amount of confusing syntax. So if we wanted to print something like first Java application on the screen, or hello world like we're going to, it's going to look something like this. So we have this particular class has the word public in front of it. That's fine to have the word public in front of it. It's actually preferred. So let's go back and we can put public. Public just means other classes could reuse this project. So that would be nice. It's not a required, but yeah, go ahead and put it there. This particular class was called first. We called ours hello world. Notice they put their first brace down here. It can be down here or up like mine. It doesn't really matter. Notice after our method public static void main string args, we could put the curly brace here or down there. This looks a little cleaner, so either way. But let's now get a line that will print out something. So notice the syntax. It goes system. So inside the class, inside the method, we're now going to write the word capital S for system. It's saying, are you going to get something input or output? We're going to send it out. So there's the output. And this is just a command called println, P-R-I-N-T-L-N. That's an L for print line. And then whatever you want to print needs to be in a set of parentheses. I usually just draw my parentheses first so I don't forget to close them. And if I want to print a literal means a word exactly or a symbol exactly. You're not requiring it to do any math. Then you put it in double quotations. I'm going to put hello world here. Notice it puts in green in JGrasp any literal or string. What that just means is characters or letters that we want to come out exact. And at the end of any statement, this is a statement because it's inside of a method, typically, not always, we use a semicolon. That's a dot and a comma. Make sure you don't put a colon, it won't work. So the one in the book is showing first Java application. As in my case, I just said hello world, just so you can see two different ones here. So some terms I just use, a literal string. It will appear in output exactly as entered. Make sure you write this between double quotation marks. Arguments, this is where that ARGS comes in. For now, just know that it's an argument. I'm not going to dig in yet. We have our method and we have our big system class. This system, it refers to standard output for a system. And that's how we're going to get some output. So if you look at any statement, here is the anatomy of a Java statement, and really start to, I know this is a little dry and boring, but it's so important to understand at this point. So think of this, that statement is a combination of several things. The word system is a class. That simply means there's a library somewhere that tells it there is this reserved word called system that's going to help us do something. After a class, you put a dot or a period, and this dot separates classes or objects or methods. So after we have the class dot, we always have a property of the class. So think of system as the head library. So it's like going over to the fiction area of the library and now pulling out a particular book, which in this case we're going to call a property. It might be pulling out a book called Of Mice and Men. So that could be a particular class. It's a property in that class. So think of it again, library, then we come get one single book. And then think of print line as a little method inside of this. Methods always have little parentheses after them. Think of this as just like one line in that book that you're looking at. And we're putting in double quotations. This is your literal string. That's an argument of the print line method. You say, what's an argument? It's just something that you're passing to this Java system to print out for you. And every Java statement ends with a semicolon. There are exceptions to that, but we're going to go with every at this time. So now that we have everything inside of our Java program, part of our class, we are also going to sooner or later have something called identifiers or a name. So let's pick up there in a second. So let's see if our code will run. We have our class named Hello World. You need to save it as that same name. If you haven't saved yet, go to File, Save As, and whatever you call your class name, this is called your identifier of your class. Make sure your file name is also the same name. So I'm going to call this one Hello World, Hello World. It'll say .java. So I've make sure it's saved with the same identifier as my class. And let's go ahead and run it. I'm going to click Build and Run. And voila, woohoo, look down here, Hello World. But life's not always perfect like that. So let me remove the semicolon and show you what happens when something is broken or doesn't work. So I'm going to go back to Build and Run. And you can see I got an error. And I know it's a little hard to read, but so let me show you down here. It says, Hello World on line 8. And you can count, or we can put line numbers later. But this is the 8th line down. It even shows me what the 8th line is. The error, it's expecting a semicolon. Wow, that's pretty nice that way to tell me that. So the compiler has an error detection to find syntax errors. So I'll put that semicolon and now hit build and run again, and now it'll work better. Please also understand that sometimes it's not really clear on what you did wrong. So it's sometimes harder to debug or find my errors, but that one was pretty basic. So let me go back and learn a couple more things. Remember we said that word hello world was our identifier, this one right here. We had to save it with that name, and that's the name of our class called Hello World. That identifier, there's some rules about when you name it. First of all, it can only contain letters, digits, underlines, that's a fancy name for underscore, and the $sign. So you say, well, what's left? Don't use like punctuation. Don't use like a question mark. It can't be a Java reserved word. Now, you don't know many reserved words. So you'll notice when you read your book, there's a whole list of some that don't use these. So don't use any of the reserved words. So you always check that list. And it can't be words like true, false, or null. We use that upper camel casing. Remember we mentioned this later. The old phrase for camel casing when you start with an upper letter of each word is also called Pascal casing. Pascal was an early coder. So that's what we call it. So it would be cool to say like undergrad student. Do you see how each word of the identifier begins with an uppercase letter? So that would be cool. Inventory item would be cool. And we usually put an access specifier, how the class will be accessed. So that's that word public out in front. It's not have to, but it's a good idea. So now let's go on, and those are the reserved words, do not use. Let's kind of look at them. These are all legal, but not recommended. If you look at undergrad student, this would work, but it's not what we call best practice. So really it should be a capital U, capital G, capital S. Got it? Inventory item. Typically we don't use the underscore. It's not usually indicated to do new words. So don't put it in the middle of anything like that. So this would work, but not best. This is all caps. Again, it would work, but it's not best. How would I fix that? Capital B, lowercase udget. And again, it would work, but class names should not begin with a lowercase letter. So don't forget, class names or identifiers, we call them, should have these uppercase letters as well. Here's some illegal ones. If you look at inventory item, why won't that work? I wish you could answer me, but it's the blank space that's the problem. Class, you see, why can't I call class class? It's one of those reserved words on the list. 2019 budget, class names cannot begin with a digit, so only with like a capital letter. And phone number, remember, no punctuation. So make sure you know those rules. So now we have the access identifier. We always use class. This is the name of the first class. We call it the identifier. It starts with a capital letter. We have our opening and closing class body braces, and then our inside method. So we're starting to kind of put all this together. The word static is one of those reserved words, and void just means we're not producing output to some other method. I know that doesn't make sense yet, but it will once we start learning that. So make sure you really kind of read through all of these parts. This is all coming from your textbook, so don't just listen to the lecture. So we call this our shell code. In other words, all code kind of starts with this, except you pick your identifier there. And then inside this area, we're going to ultimately put in some code. Now, there are really two types of Java comments. We used one that started with 2 forward slashes. You can keep typing. You don't have to require any kind of end symbol, no semicolon. But there's also a second kind. They're called block comments. The first are line comments. The second are block. Let me show you a block comment live here. So let's say I wanted to put a comment right here. Again, comments don't do anything, but they do tell the originator of the code what's going on here. We are printing out hello world. So this is called a block comment. Let me tell you the parts of it. It has a forward slash and an asterisk. We call it star, forward slash star, space. You can write anything. And then, but these require a closing. So star forward slash. So you can either use these with 2 forward slashes and no end symbols. These are called line comments, or these that are called block comments. And for now, I just want these 3 at the beginning of your code, but as our code gets a little more complicated, we'll use them to tell what the different areas do. But I want you to understand at least whether the 2 types, both of these turn red. So here is an idea of how they're demonstrating comments. You can put both in the same product. Here's line, here's the block kind, here's the line, here's the block kind. So you can have lots of different examples here. Okay, let me finish up. We are not going to get into any of this just yet. So don't forget the file's name must match the class name. Don't confuse these terms, parentheses, braces, brackets, curly braces, square brackets, angle brackets. Don't forget to end a block comment. Don't forget that Java is case sensitive. Don't forget to end every statement with a semicolon if it's not a comment. Don't forget to recompile when you make a change. So in other words, if I decide to add another line to this, I go to System, out.print line again. I could put a second line show up. They're all going to print on their separate line. So now I could say end of lat class, not the class, but our class, semicolon. Don't forget to rebuild and run again so we get both lines of output. Do you see there are 2 lines down here? Hello world, end of class. So you can put as many items as possible here. Well, guys, that's a wrap for our first lecture. We are truly a fully online class. We'll never meet in person. Obviously, we can't anyway, but we won't have any live classes. So feel free to connect with me. If something's not running for you, you're running into trouble, let me know. You could send me screenshots or make a time that we might connect real quick through Zoom if you need to. So let me know. Always want to be there and help. Ciao.